Okay, Swing Time. That is the title of your book and of a movie that I know forwards and backwards.
Oh, really?
Because I spent a lot of time, like you did, watching Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers. But it also means that this is a novel that swings in time, doesn't it?
Right. It's actually not a film that I knew very well. Obviously, I remembered the title. Originally, I wanted to put a comma after swing, and my husband said that was the most pretentious thing he'd ever heard. So we took the comma out. So I watched the film as a process of writing the book, and I didn't remember it very well at all. I think I remembered the roller skating part, that was about it. But a lot of the movies in the book aren't movies I knew particularly well, and the main movie thread in it about Jenny Lagon, she's not someone I'd ever heard of until I started writing the book. So it was a kind of, they're false memories, I didn't really have them. I kind of constructed them as I went along.
One of the many great pleasures of reading Swing Time is that it's impossible not to go on the internet and see a lot of clips with the old movies.
I wanted that, and I really feel, it's something I learned from younger writers, that your reader is a kind of cyborg because of these phones that you all have in your pockets. And so a lot of the business of literature is defunct. It's not necessary. I don't know, if you open Middlemarch, there are all these loving descriptions of a certain piece of English land, a certain kind of house, or this is all unnecessary now, so I don't do it anymore. And I presume that the reader has this power to Google, and that, instead of just being a depressing thing, it can be quite creative. You kind of play with the knowledge that they will look up these clips and see what you saw.
Well, it could sound a bit depressing because it would make you get you out of work.
No, it's just a new way to work. You've always had to find new ways to work. Photography is a challenge to painting, and the internet is a challenge to a certain kind of prose. That's fine.
You're going to read a little extract to get us into the. Would you place us, or are you starting from the very?
I always read the beginning, so I'm just going to read a little bit later on. This is just about the character, the narrator, her mother, and her best friend Tracy, who lives in a different council estate on the other side of the road. Long before it became her career, my mother had a political mind. It was in her nature to think of people collectively. Even as a child, I noticed it and felt instinctively that there was something chilly and unfeeling in her ability to analyze so precisely the people she lived among, her friends, her community, her own family. We were all at one and the same time people she knew and loved, but also objects of study, living embodiments of all she seemed to be learning up at Middlesex Polytechnic. She held herself apart, always. She never submitted, for example, to the neighborhood cult of sharpness, the passion for shiny shell suits and sparkling fake gems, for whole days spent in the hair salon, children in 50-quid trainers, settees paid for over several years on hire purchase, although neither would she ever entirely condemn it. People are not poor because they've made bad choices, my mother liked to say. They make bad choices because they're poor. But though she was serene and anthropological about these matters in her college essays, or while lecturing me and my father across a dinner table, I knew in her real life she was often exasperated. She didn't pick me up from school anymore. My father did that now, because the scene there aggravated her too much, in particular the way each afternoon time collapsed, and all those mothers became kids again, kids who'd come to collect their kids, and all these kids together turned from school with relief, free finally to speak with each other in their own way, and to laugh and joke and eat ice cream from the waiting ice cream van, and to make what they considered to be a natural amount of noise. My mother didn't fit into all of that any longer. She still cared for the group, intellectually, politically, but she was no longer one of them. Every now and then she did get caught up in it, usually by some error of timing, and found herself trapped in a conversation with her mother, often Tracy's, on Willesden Lane. On these occasions she could turn callous, making a point of mentioning each new academic achievement of mine or inventing some. Although she knew that all Tracy's mother could offer in return was more of our dance teacher's praise, which was, to my mother, an entirely worthless commodity. My mother was proud of trying harder than Tracy's mother, than all the mothers, of having got me into a half-decent state school instead of one of the several terrible ones. She was in a competition of caring, and yet her fellow contestants, like Tracy's mother, was so ill-equipped when placed beside her that it was a fatally lopsided battle. I often wondered, is it some kind of trade-off? Do others have to lose so we can win?
I think this is a pretty wonderful introduction to the narrator's mother, who is a very important figure and a very complicated one. Can we talk a little about mothers? Can we talk about this mother to begin with? Because she has aspirations, and I mean, if you write them down on a paper, I would like to help my community, and I want to have a better education for myself and my child. That sounds wonderful, but she is somehow really annoying.
Yeah, she's quite annoying. I think, I was thinking about the way that some struggles are, even when they're righteous, are personally deforming, you know. A good example is, when I first started writing essays or doing student work, I think a lot of what I wrote was quite angry. And then you're encouraged, in England anyway, to take on what is considered a sophisticated voice. And this sophisticated voice is neutral. It holds no grudges. It is kind of serene. And
is that the voice you're talking in now?
I suppose so. And the problem with that is it's easy to be serene when your life is easy. It's nice to be nice when people are nice to you. But when you're not, you're in struggle, you know, and that creates a lot of rage. And I was always interested in the kind of personal deformations that involves, you know, when you feel that you're in a kind of battle. And at street level, I suppose, in my family, certainly in my extended family, you felt this battle. I don't think white middle-class mothers of my generation put their kids out to school every day with anxiety. You know, they didn't have fear. And so you can be civilized and serene, and you can elaborate things like a sense of humor or a passion for sculpture, or you have time for these kind of concerns. But when your main concern is a kind of survival in your mind, whether warranted or not, everything else is a luxury. Do you see what I mean? And I did think about that a lot. I mean, I had, like all extended Caribbean families in London, you had a cousin you knew was in jail or somebody who had died of substance abuse. You know, you have all these kind of cautionary tales. So just trying to survive takes a lot of work, takes a lot of single-mindedness. And I think some of that can be difficult. I mean, the mother character in this book is a little bit more me than my mother, but certainly all the mothers I knew, they weren't easy people, but they didn't have the luxury of being easy people. They were fighting what they considered to be a battle every day.
But apparently the kids are also fighting a battle since they turn their backs on the school and then go out into the real life.
Yes.
Where they can be as they are and make the noise they think. Is that a general thing, do you think, for kids, or is this specific also?
Well, I think I've just been reading, at lunch today, I was reading a book I should have read a long time ago, but the only time I get to read is when I'm away from my children. So I had this book I've been wanting to read for a while, which is called Black and British. It was a TV series recently in England. It's by a Nigerian academic. And I was reading the book, and even in the first two chapters, his argument is basically that the black presence in Britain is at least 1,000 years old, which is evidentially true, and also that the diaspora in Britain are deeply intertwined at every moment in their history. And I think if I had been 13 and known any of that, I would have had a substantially different consciousness. I think it's an incredible thing to take from children any knowledge of what they're doing in a place. I think that is one of the most deforming things of all, is just you just had no clue. The thing I always remember, which is deeply embarrassing, when I tell my American friends, they can't believe it, but when I was about 12, having a discussion with some other Jamaican British children, and in this conversation we all realized, because I'd recently seen in the encyclopedia a picture of an Arawak Indian who was described as a Jamaican native, and I'd never I didn't understand what that meant, because I thought my family and people like me were native to Jamaica. So you had all this knowledge about the slave trade as it applied to West Africa and America, but I suppose I hadn't really considered the idea that the entire population of Jamaica is a descendant of a slave trade. That was news to me at 12, and I think that's a very strange and late piece of knowledge.
Yes.
And to have known it earlier would have explained a great deal.
And it was not a knowledge you could achieve at home?
Yes, my mother, I see her problem now when I have a child, is there's never a good time to tell your child about slavery or the Holocaust. It's not, when is that a good day? It's never, sometimes I think about it and so conversations go towards it and I think, she's 7, does she need to know about the Holocaust right now? Can I wait till 9 or 12? So I'm not surprised at that. She taught us a lot of things, but I can see the hesitancy. It's very hard to explain to a child mass atrocity. It's actually quite a difficult conversation to have, even if you're eager for them to understand. It's such painful knowledge. Yeah.
In this half-decent school, as you say, where the narrator is going to school and where Tracy eventually comes to, there is an amazing mix of children of all kinds of backgrounds, which you would think maybe would sort of make the problem go away. Everybody is from everywhere else, or a mix of it. So is that a possibility?
It didn't make the problem go away, but it was a very interesting atmosphere. You had kind of white, liberal families, basically ex-communist crowd, who'd sent their children to these schools on political principle, you know, recent migrants, working-class kids who had no choice, middle-class idealists. That's an interesting mix of people. So, you know, it might not have been the kind of school that marks highly on a regulator's test, but to me it was an extremely effective place to be, a really interesting place to be.
For those of you who have not had time or possibility to read Swing Time yet, we might just say a few words about where we are. It's a story of 2 girls.
Yes, and they meet in a dance class in the early 80s. And they're both mixed race, but one of them is the wrong way round, which in England in those days was to have a black mother and a white father. It was quite unusual. And they grow up together. They separate for various kind of personal and academic reasons. It just traces their early life till about the age of their early 30s, I'd say.
There's a very beautiful description of the attraction they have to each other, and that is that they are like cut out of the same piece of skin.
Yeah.
They have the same tone of skin.
This is something I feel about race, actually, that, you know, the received liberal wisdom these days, I think even Obama tweeted this recently, is that children aren't born racist, they have to be taught to be racist. I really disagree. I think children are instinctively racist. And I think lots of things that are natural are not particularly good. The problem with the analogy is the assumption that if it's natural, it must be good. Well, also, you know, kidney cancer and dying of hunger in the street is also natural. But the point of civilized life is that you try and improve upon nature, which is usually disastrous and red in tooth and claw. But I do think that children have a deep instinct for like, you know? If they grow up, as when I saw in West Africa, in completely black environments and they see a white person, they're horrified by instinct, no matter how young they are. It's complete horror. Like, what is that? There's a deep instinct in people not to understand what is different from them. Because that's natural doesn't mean that's something to be encouraged or pursued as a policy. Lots of instincts in people are lamentable. So when I thought about those children, I thought they are attracted to each other because they are similar. They have a kind of gut tribal instinct. That girl across the room looks like me. She seems like me. We have the same skin.
That's my girl.
That's my girl. I don't think you can deny that instinct in people. It's about how far you let it go, that tribal instinct, and what you have to allow in tribalism. Tribalism is natural, but it's not the only instinct we have.
And it is, I mean, Tracy is her girl, but she is a very difficult girl because on one hand she has this wonderful ability she can dance. The way that anybody who has ever wanted to dance, I mean, she's a dancer.
Right.
And the narrator wants to dance, and she dances. I mean, as far as I can tell, she's even a quite good dancer.
Right.
She sings better than she dances. But because the narrator's mother is so keen on educating her
Right.
and getting her out of there, she's taken away from this
Right.
environment. While Tracy's mother, who is, I don't know if you would say she's a more loving mother, but
Right.
she's also a more lost mother.
Right.
Has Tracy go that way.
Right.
And that separates the girls. That's one of the things. And actually, Tracy, in my humble opinion, is not a very nice girl.
No, but she's also kind of engaged in a battle. I always think Tracy is someone who has an enormous amount of spirit and energy. And someone like that can be directed in many different forms. I suppose all of my novels, I've always been concerned about natural capacities, talents, which I think everybody has in some form, and there isn't anyone on earth who doesn't have something of value to offer. And then the question of how we organize our social lives is, how do we exploit that value? Exploit seems like a negative word, but to not have your value exploited is to be completely forgotten, you know. Not to be able to use your hands when you're good with your hands, or use your mind when you're good with your mind. And nothing about racism, sexism, etc. would matter if it weren't for the mass loss of ability. That's when I think of the history of slavery, I think of 6 million people whose human value, whatever it was spilt on the ground. It never amounted to anything, was never allowed to amount to anything. It's the most awful waste of human capacity. So that's the way I look at it, that you have all these people with possibilities within them of all different kinds, and when they are lost, when they are not seen, that's a terrible collective loss. And Tracy's one of those people. She has a great amount of spirit, will, but nowhere to place it.